guys, Jasmine here, coming at you with another Biggest Losers of the Bible, and today we've got another trifecta of characters to look at. Last week we focused on 3 characters, but more specifically on Leah, the one who seemed to be most insignificant, the one who was overlooked and unloved, but yet ended up being the heroine of the story, raising all of the boys and actually being the predecessor for the 12 tribes of Israel, whose names are actually on the palace gates to the millennial kingdom. Crazy, huh? So it's really interesting to see how people who seem insignificant at times can often be the people who really are, the grander scheme of things, some of the most significant. We know that scripture says that the Lord uses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. I would definitely say Leah's situation was very much like that. Unlike Rachel, her mother-in-law, her grandmother-in-law, these heroes of the faith, she was actually buried alongside of them. Today's characters are very interesting because instead of looking at spiritual royalty, we're actually going to take a look at real world, real life royal characters. And I think we sometimes forget to put these things in context of history. How did they impact the world on a grander scale? When you see today's Biggest Loser of the Bible, you should have no doubt about their impact on the world as a whole. But there's one little caveat. These characters are mentioned in a book where God himself is not actually mentioned. How did a book get into the Bible without mentioning God? Isn't that a little crazy? We are going to take a look and explore today's Biggest Losers of the Bible.
The year as we know it is 479 BC.
Weirdly, for a book about a woman, you have to start with the dude, Esther's husband, King Xerxes. First, let us clarify. Yes, it is the same King Xerxes from 300. He was the guy who tried to conquer Greece and failed, but his list of victories is pretty extensive. He basically created the very concept of Persia after he became the ruler of Babylonia, Egypt, and a bunch of other nations with their cultures. He also popularized Zoroastrianism, the predecessor to a lot of monotheistic faiths that have messiah figures and contend with the balance between good and evil. After his conquering and soldiering days are over, Esther's predecessor, Queen Vashti,
will be the God King.
Disobeyed King Xerxes.
In the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign, he declared a time of feasting, an extended time lasting 6 months. For 180 days he showed his vast wealth and splendor of his kingdom to the military leaders and nobles and to the princes. And it was supposed to solidify his rule. His position as the great king. He was called King of Kings, which we see many times in the Persian writings, and also obviously at the palaces itself. There was this reality that he was the great king of the mighty and vast Persian Empire. This wasn't just, hey, come around for dinner and let's have a chat. This was a very, very strong power play. And again, this was because there were battles that he was going to face off with Greece soon after this. And so it was a display that I'm coming, I have everything, I'm powerful, and I'm going to, pillage this Greek army.
And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus.
This was to be open to everybody, not just the nobles and the princes who were feasting for 6 months, but commoners could come as well. The Bible actually tells us that the decor was first class. It was fit for a king. Verse 8 tells us the drinking was carried on in accordance with the law, and no one was compelled to drink, for the king had directed each official of his household to comply with each guest's wishes. Drink until you fall down, or drink nothing at all, you decide. Vashti has a separate banquet just for the ladies in the palace of Xerxes.
You can do this, King Ahasuerus. I can do it better than you.
On the 7th day, when the king's heart was joyful with wine in high spirits, he commanded Memuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abaktha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is how it's said in Hebrew, but it is Xerxes.
They say, we want to see Vashti. And the king says, you know what? My wife is the most beautiful one. So, of course, with pleasure, she should come.
So it says, he commanded the 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, to display her beauty before the people and the officials, for she was lovely to see. But this chaos really inflamed the heart of Xerxes, and overindulgence led him to desire to show the world this one final possession that he had not yet put on display.
The king's eunuch asks to be received.
Don't just stand there, Arbona. Speak.
The king requires my lady's presence.
For what purpose?
He makes display of his most treasured objects.
Am I such an object?
The most beautiful of all, my queen.
It does not befit a lady, much less a queen, to be displayed before a man quite drunk, after too many days of feasting.
The king wills it. You are to wear the royal crown.
And he desires nothing else but to show off what he possesses. And the rabbis say that it's very, very possible that Xerxes expected Vashti to appear only wearing the crown.
She is to come wearing her crown, i.e. wearing only her crown.
Say to the king that I refuse.
But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, which was delivered to her by the eunuchs. The king became extremely angry and he burned with rage. You know, Xerxes expected the queen to appear just with the crown on, wearing nothing else.
I've shown you all my kingdom, and now here's my wife, right? And then she dares to say no.
Lower my dignity. Oh, shame my reign by wearing the royal crown before your drunk and thinly veiled war council.
And the downfall of Queen Vashti actually began to happen earlier than we think, earlier than we thought. You see, the Bible is telling us here that King Ahasuerus held a feast for everybody in Shushan, the citadel, male and female, the children, the middle-aged, the elderly, everybody, great and small, all races, everybody was invited by the king to this feast. And it tells us that this feast was in the court of the garden of the palace. But something really intriguing happened here, that Queen Vashti made a feast for all the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Lord, why did Queen Vashti make a feast of her own for the women in the royal palace, yet the king had decreed to make a feast for everybody?
I hate you. I am better than you. I just despise you.
You see, Queen Vashti doing her own little feast was actually an act of rebellion. It showed and revealed her place as a wife. She did not submit to the king. You see, the king decided to do a feast for everybody. But Queen Vashti said, I don't like the way that the king does his feast. I don't like the way that they drink. I don't want to be seen in the court of the palace. I'm the queen. Why should I be seen? I'm so beautiful. I'm too beautiful to be with everybody, with the commoners. I'm too beautiful to be with the small. I just want to be with the great women. I don't want to be around all those men drinking. I don't want to be around all those paupers and those slaves that work for us. I don't want to be in that position. I want to be in my own place, in a place of royalty, with women that I love, women that I adore, women that adore me, women that are important. It tells us that this is not the first time that Queen Vashti disobeys the decisions of the king, disobeys the things that the king does, disobeys and rebels against the decrees of the king. She rebelled against the king.
Memucan answered before the king and the princess, said, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and all the people that are all in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. And the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. And likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written in the bylaws of the Persians and the Medes, that it not be altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small.
No one spoke up for her. No one said, oh, please, your highness, please forgive her. She's nobody. Because I think everybody at this point was tired of Vashti. Even though she was beautiful, even though she was the queen, even though she had respect and power, people were already fed up of her character. And I'm guessing what broke the camel's back was when she decided to be disrespectful to the king himself. And even the king had had enough. And they decided to strip her of her position, of her status, because of her character.
There are young women in every province of the kingdom who are of perfect virtue, and bring them unto the palace at Shushan. Each will be considered as to her worthiness to be presented to the king, who will choose one to be his queen.
Esther, time comes too quickly.
I love you, Mordecai. You have been a good father to me.
I will miss you.
Now, you're Mordecai? Her mother's closest kin?
Her father's nephew. Esther is my cousin.
Elohei Yisrael.
Elohei Israel.
Yoshev HaKruvim.
Yoshev HaKruvim.
Adonai. Elohei Israel. Yoshev HaKruvim. Hoshienu na.
Huna, the husband.
May be wise. Keep your lineage a secret.
A man, he's in mourning.
He sounds so sad. Perhaps he's lost something. Or someone. He must be a Jew. He's dressed as a Hebrew.
My child, an evil abounds in the king's court. Haman hath won the king's heart and has offered a sum of money for the king's treasuries that he might destroy the Jews. Here is the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy us. For the good of thy father's house, I charge thee to go in unto the king and make supplication unto him for thy people.
Mordecai, do you not realize the weight of thy request? All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, will be put to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter. I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days.
My queen, Mordecai giveth this message in return. If thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall thou and thy father's house be destroyed. What doth he mean, thy father's house?
Is that all?
No. He hath said also, who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
Mordecai, go. Gather together all the Jews that are present in the city, and fast ye for me. And neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish.
Stand together, be united!
Feeling like I need a purpose, but when you talk to me, give me the impression that I won't scratch your surface. And I could walk for days, searching for your praise, but is it even there to find? Is there a chance for me? I slowly lose my mind. Will I slowly lose my mind? Will I slowly lose my mind? Will I slowly lose my mind?
Vashti lost her empire because of her character, while Esther gained an entire kingdom and the respect of the people in the kingdom and the respect of the king.
This king has so many, 127 provinces, and the 180 days of drinking and feasting, and then 7 more days, and then after 7 days of drinking and goblets of wine, I'll show you my beautiful wife. And she says no. And reading that story within the context of the ancient world is wives were allowed to come to the party, to banquets, but once the drinking got out of hand, the wives went home. You bring in the dancing girls and concubines. So it makes sense to me. As the queen, she said, this is not my role. I will not do this. So Vashti was a person who said, this is far enough. Like, this is an ethical issue.
I'm too much of a queen to be your stripper.
In August of 465 BC, Xerxes was assassinated by Artabanus, the most powerful official of the Persian court. Xerxes I had 3 sons, of which his eldest, Darius II, was also killed by Artabanus. King Xerxes I, who led the Battle of Thermopylae, is the direct descendant from his grandfather Cyrus the Great, who decreed a legal document for the reconstruction of God's temple, and he is the grandfather of Darius III, son of Artaxerxes, who carried out that decree, which resulted in God receiving the glory.
So Esther actually had the character to be able to sustain her role as queen for Xerxes. It's not like this was a good godly man. When you look back at her story and her rose ceremony moment, these bachelorettes ended up prepping for a year with beauty treatments and etiquette training, and then they spent a night with the king, and if he decided that he liked him, that's how they became queen. Knowing the type of person Xerxes was, my suspicion is that the night with the king was not especially wholesome. And so you see this man who is basically bringing in all these girls for one night stands to decide who he wants to make queen. He's having lavish 6-month drunken parties, and he obviously, based on his historical significance, has no qualms about being vicious and violent in his military campaigns. And so it makes you wonder, why in the world God put her with this guy? And why is God not mentioned at all if he has got a hand in this? And I think we as Christians get so focused on seeing really blatant evidence of God that we overlook the day-to-day blessings and coincidences that in fact are actually still God's hand. Obviously, God controls everything, so it's nothing that he is not aware of. The Bible mentions plenty of times where God will turn the heart of kings or do any sort of number of things, particularly with leadership and political authorities. If it wasn't a trusted advisor or a very respected military rival, there's probably very little anybody in the kingdom of Persia would have been able to do to influence a man as powerful as Xerxes. History has told us that the wives and the women that these men love can and will massively affect their behaviors. It is really unfortunate for Vashti in one regard, because even though it is clear that she had a bit of a rebellious, nasty nature to her, she was in fact adhering to what she felt were her morals and her principles. And it was her morals and her principles and her character that actually ended up getting her dethroned. Without going too far into the backstory, essentially Vashti was a war prize that was captured when she was a small child. The rest of the people in the kingdom were not necessarily spared, but because of her beauty, Vashti actually was spared. She came from royalty, she came from nobility, and she was the most beautiful thing anybody had ever seen, and so she felt entitled to draw her line in the sand about what she would and wouldn't do. And I'm not saying that Vashti's behavior was completely wrong. I think that it's a wonderful thing that she stood up for her morals and her principles, saying, I am not going to show up the way you want me to show up and demean myself and diminish myself. At the same time, her alluded to history of rebellious behavior seems to indicate that her downfall was near. Pride comes before a fall, and so unfortunately, even if she was standing up for the right things, the way she approached things wasn't good. Perhaps Vashti could have said, you know what, I'm too noble and royal to show up the way he wants me to show up, but I will put on my best attire and I will go and present myself to the kingdom so that they can see who I am without me diminishing myself. There could have been potentially some compromise that she could have made that would have prevented her from completely losing her reign, but she didn't take advantage of that. So unfortunately, that's where Vashti's legacy lies. It's a big mess of confusion as to whether her character was really truly noble and admirable or not. And it's a really unfortunate situation that this daughter of nobility who became a war trophy has her legacy relinquished to this woman who lost her kingdom due to a prideful error. King Xerxes' legacy certainly speaks for itself. So while Xerxes' decision, largely prompted by his beautiful wife Esther, was a benefit to the children of Israel, Xerxes himself was not a God-fearing man. He was actually quite the antithesis of what we would consider a God-fearing man. He was pushing other religions and behaving in really inappropriate ways. But because of his God-fearing wife, he actually brought a blessing on his own household. King Xerxes finds himself sandwiched between his grandfather, who basically started the process of getting the temple in Jerusalem rebuilt, and his grandson, who would eventually finish the process. He himself ends up saving the Jewish people, who, if they had been annihilated, wouldn't have needed a temple at all. And look at everyone's lives and look at your role and your losses and your wins from the perspective of a bigger picture. Sometimes the things that you think are wins aren't wins. Maybe Queen Esther wasn't brought to the palace just because she was so beautiful. Maybe she was brought to the palace because she needed to save her people. I think that's a great reminder for us, and a great prayer for us to have is, Lord, give us the characters to sustain the weight of the callings that we have. So that's all I have for today. Do not forget to like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think. And although I have a pretty good idea where we're going, I can't wait to see where it takes us next time. Bye, guys.